What's up, everyone? My name is Cordell, aka Hot Cocoa, and today we're going to talk about how you can get your hands involved with your synths while you're making music so that you can get embodied with your creativity. I'm going to break down why it's so important psychologically to get your hands involved with your instruments. I'm going to show you how I do it in one of my own tracks. I'm going to break open the project file for you, and I'm going to show you how you can set it up for yourself so that you can start fondling knobs. So if that sounds cool, stick around. I'm trying to rap, area. Wanna find nobody. For real. Wanna find nobody. For real. I'm trying to rap, area. For real. Okay, so there's a million different ways that you can actually make music with your body. There's obviously a huge, rich history of acoustic instrumentation, and it used to be that this was the only way to make music, was to get involved with your hands or your feet or your mouth or your face somehow. In fact, some cultures don't even distinguish a difference between moving and dancing and making music. It's one and the same for so many different cultures and regions and traditions. But lately, in our modern era, we're actually spending a lot of time making music with nothing but a computer keyboard and a mouse, sometimes just the space bar and a single click. It can be very sedentary and it can be very cerebral, very thought focused rather than body focused, which can be fine. You can absolutely make incredible music this way. A lot of my own beats have been made this way, but a lot of the time getting your body involved can actually make a huge difference in the way it feels to make music and the expression that comes out of the music that you're making. Psychologists would actually call this process embodied cognition. This means that the way you're thinking is actually completely intertwined with the way your body works and the type of body you have and the feelings that you get in your body. There's three kind of principles of embodied cognition that are all going to play a role in however you decide to create. The first principle of embodied cognition is what's called conceptualization. So this just refers to the fact that your whole experience and how you interpret it is always going to come through a body. So every concept you have, every idea that you have, everything that you know about the world around you happens through the lens, through your perceptions, through the experience of being inside of a body. And so when you're creating, you're making music, it's actually really important for your body to be involved if you want to understand what you're doing, what you're experiencing, the sounds that you're generating and impacting. This all happens through your body. So the more your body is involved, the more you'll have an accurate and in-depth understanding of what's even happening in the first place while you're creating. The second important principle for embodied cognition is what we're going to call continuity. And this just refers to the fact that your thoughts, your mind, doesn't happen in discrete, separate, specific concepts. It's not like thought. It doesn't really happen in chunks. It happens continuously. And this continuousness is an interaction between your body and your mind and the world around you. It's constantly unfolding in a bi-directional relationship. And so understanding this constant flow and realizing that your body is a part of this bi-directional constant flow is a really big part of understanding embodied cognition. And finally, the third principle of embodied cognition we'll talk about today is constitution. This refers to the fact that your body constitutes your mind just as much as your brain and your thoughts constitute your mind. These two are not only interacting like we talked about before, but they are your mind. The same way oxygen is water. You can't have water without oxygen because it's oxygen and hydrogen mixed together. You can't have a mind without a body because it's a body and thoughts mixed together. When you understand this interaction, you realize that there is no duality. There's no mind-body relationship in the kind of separate sense. It's one single unified experience, one single system that interacts together. So the more you're bringing your body into your creative process, the more you're actually engaging your full mind, which is what you need in order to make authentic, engaging, and just epic creative projects. Now, if you've watched anything on my channel, you know that my favorite way to embody my creative process is to hit things with my hands. I love playing finger drumming. I use sticks. I've got all kinds of hardware over here that lets me feel the rhythms and the sounds that I'm making. But a really amazing way is with knobs. This is something that plays a huge role in almost every song that I compose or produce, and it can get really expensive if you're doing like analog gear and modular synthesis stuff. It can get thousands and thousands of dollars deep into this whole world of hardware. But in Ableton, you can actually map anything you want to really cheap and affordable hardware. Some pieces of MIDI hardware are as low as like $90. And although that isn't the cheapest, it can still be a lot more accessible than like a $3,000 hardware synth. And so if you get some of these MIDI controllers, the one that I'm going to use today is called an APC40, you can actually map all of these knobs or all of these faders to anything that you want inside Ableton. So I'm going to actually show you how I do this process in a remix for Murs, the legendary rapper, with Peanut Gallery Records. Such an amazing project, just released this week. I'm going to open it up and show you how I embodied my creative process. But first, make sure you like this video and hit subscribe. And with that, let's dive in. Alright, so here's my Ableton project for Dominant Freestyle by Murs, which I flipped, Hot Cocoa Remix with Peanut Gallery. It's a big project file, it's got a lot of elements, but there's really two tracks that I want to show you today. One of them is this bass line here, and the other is this chord synth here. So let's give it a listen, and then we can dive into how I made some of these noises. Let's hear how it sounds. So you can hear there's a lot of movement in the synths and there's a lot of movement in the bass line. You can see here it's a big old group and it's got two main knobs. One I call the sauce knob. This is just a bunch of different things that I put onto a macro. It's one of my favorite ways to produce. And the other one is called sync rate, and that's what's adjusting the rhythm that you're hearing. But let's break into what the sauce knob is and what the sync rate actually is. So if you click this small button here, it'll actually open up everything inside of a group after it's been hidden. And you can see this is actually a pretty simple patch. This is an operator with some reverb on it and an auto pan. That's really the only thing that's making this sub here. Now the sauce knob is essentially making it more harmonically rich, is one way you can put it. So you can see here at the end of the phrase, this sauce is automated up. Yeah. So as the sauce knob goes up, there are a few things. And if you really want to see this, you can actually hit this M here for this map button and open up your side panel, and it'll show you all the things that are mapped to sauce. So the first one is called operator spread. So if we look inside of operator here, there's a spread knob. This actually just creates more width. So as the sauce knob goes up, the patch itself becomes wider over time. The second thing you can see here on the sauce knob is oscillator B output level. So that's here. We've got oscillator A, B, C, and D. Oscillator B, the level, has been mapped to the sauce knob. The way that you map something to a knob is you can right click it and then you just choose what macro knob you want it to go to. This only happens if you're inside of a group. So first you would click on your patch or your instrument, Command G will put it into a group for you. Once you've got a group, you'll have a bunch of these macro knobs. And I'm currently in Ableton 11 right now, although 12 is coming soon. And in Ableton 11, you can add more macro knobs by hitting this plus button, or you can reduce the amount of macro knobs you have here by hitting the minus button. And a macro is just a universal knob that you can assign anything you want to. So a sauce knob is simply a bunch of different parameters that have been put on a single knob. And you can do this with a bunch of different knobs. Getting into the world of macros is an amazing journey, and I can't wait for all of you to join me on this. So you just right click and add your macro to your sauce knob. You can right click it and hit rename if you don't want it to just be called macro 1. But so first I put the spread on there, then I put the level on here. And the final thing is reverb. Now, what's important to note about mapping things to a macro or to a sauce knob is you can map the amount that the knob affects the parameter. So what I mean by that is when the knob goes all the way up to the top, 127 is the maximum MIDI amount, you can see my reverb is actually only at 48%. Because once you get past 50%, it becomes more reverb than synth. So I really want it to stick at 48. So here I did the same thing. I right-clicked and mapped to sauce, but then I hit this map button, that M, and you can change the amount here. So you can change the maximum amount in this lane or the minimum amount in this lane. So you can see for the spread, I didn't change it. For the oscillator B output level, I brought the maximum down to -6 because when it goes all the way, it's just a little too crazy for me. So I brought that down, and then of course the reverb, I brought that down. Now the only other thing I've got mapped to this particular bass is the sync rate, which is one of my favorite things to manipulate with a knob with my hands, because that's the rhythm. You can change how fast it goes and how slow it goes, and it's just really fun to do. This is connected to the auto pan. Auto pan is really fun if you bring the phase all the way down to 0. What you can do is basically, instead of panning side to side, it'll just move the entire volume up and down. And so I put it into rhythmic mode here instead of hertz. I adjusted the offset a bit, and I chose a triangle wave instead of a sawtooth wave or a sine wave, just for the particular pattern that I wanted. And the amount is all the way to 100, but the rate is what I also mapped to macro 2, which is now called sync rate. And so after I've got these sauce knobs, I need to actually move them. And this is where the fun begins. You can hit Command M. This will bring up your MIDI mapping. So you can see here that I've already got these mapped to something. All you need to do is click the parameter that you want and then wiggle the knob that you want to use to control that parameter. And it'll instantly change. Click on the parameter and wiggle the knob. When you leave MIDI mode, now I'm controlling these using the knob. It's that easy, super fast. You can actually see in the auto pan the way the rate changes when I move this knob, and all the other parameters going on in operator. And then what you can do is, once you start playing, you can actually record this automation. Automation is just any parameter change over time. So as you're wiggling this to the music, you can record your wiggliness and it'll show up in your production. As you can see here, I've already done this, but we're going to re-record over it for your sake. What's really important is that you click on these two buttons up here. This is your arm automation button, and what that means is you want to record your automation. If this button isn't clicked, then it will not record the changes that you make. The second button you want clicked is this MIDI arrangement overdub button. What this means is you don't want to delete this MIDI. So I wrote in the MIDI first before I did this automation. And if your track is armed like this and you hit record, it would record over the MIDI, which might be what you want to do. You can play and wiggle knobs at the same time. But in my case, for this particular production, I wrote the bass line first, just by pointing and clicking, not very embodied, but then I wanted to record the automation afterward. So in order to keep the MIDI here, I have to turn on the MIDI arrangement overdub button. The other button up here that's important for you to know is called the re-enable automation button. And what that means is if I wiggle something like this that's already been automated, this just lets you know, like, hey, you canceled that automation, and it'll go to whatever you moved it to. It'll default to trusting you. But if you want it to go back to what you've actually recorded, you just need to re-enable that automation. Cool, so let's solo this and listen to what happens when I wiggle these two different knobs. So that was the sauce knob. Here's our rate. So fun. Let's hear that in context with the rest of the song. So fun. And what you can do is, for example, this one had a bunch of lyrics on it. You can play around with the relationship between the lyrics, the rhythm of the bass line, and the amount of harmonics that you're introducing, or any other instrument that's going on, so that you have this dynamic interplay that's really responsive and that you can achieve right away, right from your body.
My microphone is like Buddha bless, along with an MC down with Buddha test. Cause I rock from here to there, it don't matter. Your underwear will get stretched out when I come through fat with more calories.
So fun. So fun. All right, I'll give you one more example to show you how you can do this. That was with the bass line, but I did a very similar technique for a synth that I've got here. So Synth 1 MIDI, you can see it's a really similar setup. I've got a sauce knob and a sync rate knob. Let's see what's different in here. So inside this, I've got another instrument rack, and this has two different instruments built into it. One is just some keys that I don't think is really doing anything but making piano sounds. Yeah, that one is just some sine keys, basic sine keys, but where the real magic happens is in this wavetable patch here. So, yeah, it's a saw wave. It's a sawtooth wave with a little bit of warp on it. It's also got a second sawtooth wave with a little bit of fold on it. Those are two things that are doing most of the work. This frequency cutoff here is really a big part of the sound as well. You can see that this is mapped to this LFO here. So that's just giving it a little bit of extra movement, but all of that is controlled by another auto pan. So I've just got this kind of oscillating, wiggling sine wave, but the rhythm on top of that is coming from the auto pan. And of course you've got a sauce knob. So this sauce knob, let's see what it's connected to. This one is even simpler than the bass line. It's going to the filter 1 frequency, which is really just the frequency for this particular wavetable patch. And then the sync rate is going to the auto pan, which is set up the exact same way as that bass line. So these don't have to get crazy complicated. You can put dozens and dozens of parameters on a particular macro knob and have dozens of macro knobs. I've done it. It's also really fun. But sometimes you just need a couple of macro knobs to wiggle around, and it adds a lot of this organic movement. For this, I used two different knobs here. So let's hear how it sounds when we wiggle these knobs for the synth track. Let's record it just so that you know what it looks like when you hit record. So I'm going to make sure that the overdub function is on so I don't delete any of my MIDI chords. I'm going to make sure that record automation is on so that it actually records the automation. You make sure that your track is armed, and then you literally just hit record.
Shit like semen, niggas don't wanna fuck with me. Cardiac arrest, you know my legion, don't be trying to stress. My microphone is like Buddha bless, along with an MC down with Buddha test. Cause I rock from here to there, it don't matter. Your underwear will get stretched out when I come through fat with more calories. My microphone earns major salaries like celeries. I got so many proteins. Niggas over here on my jock, trying to grab the scrotum. Talk about how love them fucking rights, nigga, I wrote them. Don't try to bite, don't try to be sight what I'm saying. I'm on this microphone, you better be praying that somebody new and specific. My style is so
boom. So fun. Alright, so that's how I do it. Let me know if there's a way that you want to get involved in terms of embodying your creative process. Write me in the comments down below how you're actually getting your hands on some of this stuff. We can share with other people everyone's own unique embodied approach. There's an infinite amount of ways to do this, and I want to hear how you're doing it. Let me know if there's anything else you want me to tackle with this kind of subject matter in the future, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Peace.